Taoiseach, I want to start by reading you something. The government has made major mistakes and they continue to make them today. The government never learned that one cannot tax or cut one's way out of a recession. One can only grow out of a recession. Consequently, their slash and burn policies were counterproductive. Taoiseach, that statement's spot on, and I couldn't have written it better myself. I've uttered words similar to that on many occasions, particularly during previous budget speeches. But I didn't write those words. The Minister for Finance wrote them, and he delivered them when he stood on this side of this House in response to Fianna Fáil's austerity budget in 2010. So the question I think we can legitimately ask ourselves today is what has happened since? Have the corridors of power had such an effect on the Minister for Noonan that he decided to implement not one but 3 austerity budgets that he himself has said are counterproductive? Because here we are again today, this time in October, on your 3rd budget announcement, peddling the same policies which you and your government, your party, has said were counterproductive. And these policies were counterproductive because let's look at where they've got us. High levels of unemployment, high levels of immigration, high levels of poverty, and this year we expect 0% growth in the domestic economy. So Taoiseach galan sibh cudmhór, doubt to be for the Sinn, agus bug a chorann sibh ar fáil. Taoiseach, your government delivers its 3rd austerity budget in a year that marks the centenary of the 1913 lockout, a time when great Irish men and Irish women stood up against greed, unfairness and the unending pursuits of profit on the back of the Irish workers. 100 years after the great event, the words of the poem that celebrated that should, in my view, be engraved on the doors of the Minister for Finance. What need you, being come to sense, but fumble in a greasy till, and add the halfpence to the pence, and prayer to shivering prayer, until you have dried the marrow from the bone? Because Taoiseach and Taoiseach, yous have dried the marrow from the bone of ordinary Irish working people the length and breadth of this state. Along with Fianna Fáil, you have inflicted on the Irish people 6 successive years of austerity. Over €28 billion of taxes and cuts. And you come in here today and you tell the Irish people that that wasn't enough, that you want more. You tell ordinary families that they need to pay more taxes. You tell them that their public services have to be diminished a little bit more. You tell them that the safety nets that were there to protect them need to be stripped away, while you fumble in your greasy till and protect the highest sections of society, the bankers, developers, and not to forget yourselves. Sin rud na dtíogann sibh a Taoiseach agus a Hainiste is na híglah a heileú a haisciú as muncher na hÉireann. 100 years after the lockout, and your government has locked yourselves into a policy of austerity. And the Irish people, locked outside of the gates of Leinster House today, are protesting at this budget. But you will ignore them, just as you ignored them in successive years, just as you ignored the pleas from civic society that the policies of austerity were not working for them, for their families or the communities. Like in 1913, this is a day when the Irish people deserve to see courage and leadership in challenging the economic woes inflicted on our state. And my party has categorically proven to this government that you had a range of options. You had a range of options when it came to formulating the budget. We submitted you with those options last week in our alternative budget proposals. What it would have done, Taoiseach, is it would have reduced the tax burden on ordinary families. It would have protected public services, and it would have invested in jobs in a real way, providing the type of jobs that we need to kick-start this economy and get the economy growing again. And it was costed. It was costed by your own department. It costed by your own department in public expenditure, and costed. Labour do not want to hear the truth. Let them shout me down as much as they want. But this budget was costed by the Department of Finance, as it was the public of expenditure.
Sir, could we have order, please?
Minister, I am more aware than many of the problems facing our state. Tá nimirce an geostiachta agus an wachtanach mar chuid de gré síl na daoine inis ar fud na tíre. Agus ficim se sin gath le I me cheantar héin I dtír honol agus in dhéar go héiria. Agus is dhéar na héan tú héna hí si. Ag níl go to bí faduda, nar ancomid ar na policy patisa chu a bhain san pen asna seo agus na policy hart a bhain le dhéadhéannas go dogan tú cúil na cinne da muir in dhéair agus muir mhuió nar is síon tú stas an luistan sin agus tóran tú ar bhualathe clia. Our party, Sinn Féin, doesn't shrink from meeting the economic problems this state face. But we would face them with courage, with leadership, with honesty and, more important, with solutions that would provide for ordinary families and communities. What you have given the people today is another budget lacking in vision and another budget lacking in fairness and fair solutions. It is for the third time a complete capitulation by the Labour Party, who sold their principles for the price of power. And that is why they get excited when it is pointed out to them that here they are today delivering more cuts to the departments that they said that they would protect. Minister, you're an expert. The Minister is an expert at delivering these budget speeches now. As usual, he leads off with all the gruff about how great he is and buries all the bad news. You don't make €2.5 billion of adjustment in the way that this government does without counting people where it hurts. And this budget was a budget written by spin doctors, and the devil is always in the detail. And you have gone back to the same hard-pressed families as usual, and you've asked for more. Hikes in excise duties, cuts to maternity benefit, that's the second time that you've hit the mothers, cuts to illness benefits, cuts to the drugs initiative of 7%. Well done on that one, Taoiseach. A cut to the telephone allowance. I mean, what is your goal in that one? Is it that you cut the old age pensioners so hard and then you take the telephone from them so they can't phone you up to complain about it? An increase in the rent supplement contribution. An increase. The reality, as these gang start heckling, the reality is, and they will know this, that many elderly have been coming to our constituency offices over the years because of financial pressures, and they've been looking to disconnect their phones. But they also know the rules in relation to having their personal alarm monitor. You need your phone to have that monitor. Your cut today puts elderly people in jeopardy, and that's the reality, and you can heckle and say whatever you want. It is the reality of what you're doing. Why you have decided to target them is beyond me. But then let's look at the other cuts that you've introduced. Cuts in the rent supplement contribution, and probably the most despicable of them all, the cut to the bereavement grant. Taoiseach, it is wrong, absolutely wrong. Talk to any family who's gone through a bereavement at this point in time, who are eligible for this bereavement grant. Talk to them and say that the only support that the state provides to bury their loved one, young or old, the €850 bereavement grant has been taken away from them. It is simply wrong, Taoiseach, and you should not strip away that grant from families who need it at this time. The cost of burying your loved one, the cost of burying your loved one is an expensive cost, and you have decided to cut the bereavement grant €850. It is wrong. It is simply wrong, and you know it's wrong. And your backbenchers will know it's wrong, and anybody who has faced a bereavement will also know it's wrong as well. There are measures that you have introduced in this budget that try to soften the blow, and I welcome them. Some of these measures are measures that we've called for. However, the context in which you introduce them is brutal. You have introduced free GP care for the under-5s, something that we called for. But at the same time, you withdraw the medical cards from the very vulnerable people. So what you're doing is you're pitting grandparent against grandchild to make pitiful savings. And people can see through that. It's not right that you decide to take from the grandparent to give to the grandchild. You could have provided free GP care for 5s and under, at the same time protecting vulnerable people in their elderly age. I welcome the introduction of the bank levy, but it's for too short a period. Why is it restricted to a short period of time? Your government and the last government have pumped €65 billion into the banks. A short-term levy doesn't make up for that in any way. But today, Taoiseach, and I'm glad that Taoiseach is here, because we haven't heard a bloody single word about the game changer. Not a single word about the game changer, the seismic shift from the ESM. Actually, the only word we heard from it was the Chancellor in Germany, who told us it's not on. So when are we going to get this money back that your government, 21 billion that you pumped into the banks and the rest by Fianna Fáil? You're silent, and your budget is silent in relation to that. The fact is, the bitterness of what you're asking people to swallow today is made no sweeter by the handful of measures you hope to distract the Irish public with. Taoiseach, in Sinn Féin's fair budget alternative, we argued for a lesser adjustment to be made, and I'm glad that government has heeded that call. But I'm disappointed that you did it with a sleight of hand. Introducing €2.5 billion of an adjustment in taxes and savings, while at the same time using money from the state's cash reserves from the sale of lotto and other sources to bring the actual adjustment, as Minister Noonan announced, to €3.1 billion, is a sleight of hand. And the Irish people aren't naive when it comes to the games that politicians play. They can see when they're being sold a pup, because the Labour Party needs a fig leaf to cover its blushes. Agus caiimiis ceistethar, ceir the hasan party nach debre, and vile sa tríide, could you hasan ship from the honye ní smó? Because what the Labour Party should have done is argue for a lower adjustment, but also a budget that would give back to ordinary working families. Ordinary families. And that is what Sinn Féin has proposed in our fair budget proposal. We set out a series of measures. For example, abolishing the property tax, that next year you want to implement the full whack of property tax on 1.8 million households. So abolish the property tax and give taxpayers a rebate of about €278 per annum. Why not take, as we proposed, 296,000 of lowest paid income earners out of the USC tax net? It can be done, and it can be done, and you can go further, but you refuse to do it. And why not? Why not, after 12 months later, restore the respite grant care? Remember that one, Eamon? It was one of the nastiest, littlest, viciousst cut that you implemented on the 82,000 carers that were giving care to their loved one the length and breadth of this state. €325. Why not put it back into their pocket? Or have you still not learned the lesson that you should not cut people who are caring for people in the home? The reducing the cost of school books for children. You have announced a measure that goes €5 million in terms of the school book rental. Is to be welcomed, but it doesn't go far enough. We have argued that half of all school books, core school books, would be provided free of charge. And you failed to deliver on additional school meals, which we called for, where an additional 500 schools could see the rolling out of the school meals. Again, you're silent on the fuel allowance season, and the government were forced to extend it last year as an emergency measure. Then why not extend it permanently? Because we know that fuel poverty is something that far too many of our citizens are living with. And we did this with still allowing for an adjustment of €2.5 billion, with a measure of 30 taxation and spending measures costed by your department to eliminate waste in the public service, to drive through efficiencies in the public service, to reduce salaries at the higher end, and to reduce your salaries also, Taoiseach and Taoiseach and others, and also to ask those who earn the most in society to pay their fair share in taxation to help with the recovery of our economy and our country. Not only is this government not prepared to give something back, but you come in and you slash another €1.6 billion from essential frontline services. Over the last weeks in this chamber, we've heard the parents of sick children and children with special needs describe the horrifically stressful situations that they found themselves in because medical cards had been taken from them by your government. Minister Taoiseach Taoiseach, these children shouldn't have to become, and the parents of these children shouldn't have to become full-time lobbyists to get your attention. They shouldn't have to spend precious time away from their children. They shouldn't have to be writing letters or attending protests or writing government's office, nor should they have to provide the begging bowl to get what is theirs by right or what they need for their children by right. Where is your threshold of decency? And I encountered one such group of parents and children earlier this year, and it is absolutely astonishing to imagine that up to now that this government has been implementing a policy of providing profoundly deaf little children with only one hearing implant. That is the equivalent of providing a short-sighted child with a pair of glasses with only one lens. When the provision of two-ear implants is better for the child's development than one, we all know that. Why would you only give them one? And to make matters worse, Taoiseach, when the implant fails, which they frequently do, these children are cast back into a world of silence once again. I have heard, as many deputies in this House have heard, the heartbreaking stories from the parents of these children who've had to witness their baby's distress, their confusion, their frustration when they go from the hearing world around them into the world of hearing nothing. These parents have ran a campaign. They've ran a campaign over the last year for their children and for all of the nation's children. And they are in the gallery today, and they're the true heroes today. You know what? They are the true heroes. People who have to stand up and fight this government to get what their children should have as a right. This country's purse strings are not yours and yours alone. The money with which you run this state and pay yourself handsomely with comes from taxpayers' pockets. It comes from the pockets of those parents in the gallery. And when you cut or underfund our health services, you are cutting and underfunding the service that taxpayers have paid for. So, Taoiseach, I'll tell you this. If your Minister for Health can't manage the health budget, then he should be fired. If he has neither the guts nor the will to take on powerful lobby groups who are sucking money from the health services instead of putting it in frontline services, then he should be sacked. Because that is what you promised. That is what you promised when you became Taoiseach, that ministers who didn't perform would be moved out of the way. So, Minister, do the right thing. Sinn Féin has placed a private members' time motion in relation to bilateral cochlear implants. Make the announcement. You should have done it today. Give the gift of hearing to the 200 children where the time is running out for them. Minister, we have heard a lot of figures today, and we should make sure that we don't forget some very important ones. 142,892. That was the number of family homes that were in mortgage distress at the end of June of this year. The number of family homes that were in arrears in their mortgage. It is a figure that has doubled under the time of your government, just like it doubled under the time of the previous government also. And Taoiseach, you can't, I'm sure, begin to imagine the worry, the anxiety that people face when they can't pay their mortgages. You can't put yourself in the shoes of a husband or wife who are sitting down, looking at their children, worrying, are they about to lose the roof that's over them? And unfortunately, there are tens of thousands of families in that situation. It's not that they can't pay their mortgages, it's they simply don't have the means to pay their mortgages. Fianna Fáil's housing policy saddled these families with unsustainable debt. Fine Gael and Labour at every opportunity, every single opportunity, have protected the banks and supported the banks and enabled the banks to pursue these families for this debt. So, Taoiseach, where on your priority list is the Irish family with an unsustainable debt burden? This year, this government was forced to acknowledge the issue of mortgage distress because the bare facts from the balance sheets of the banks told you it was a problem. But what were your solutions? What did you come up with? You removed the Dunn judgment, the only protection that people had in relation to repossession of the family home, and you gave the OK to the banks to issue 15,000 letters threatening repossessions. Unbelievable. And you allow the personal insolvency practitioners to cherry-pick the most lucrative cases, leaving the banks happy, always in the knowledge that they're going to have the final say, because Taoiseach, Taoiseach, your government gave them the veto. In our fair budget proposal, we set out a plan for publicly funded insolvency practitioners, so at least every person in mortgage distress could be assured access to this service and have it free of charge. We've also produced legislation you should adopt, that would strengthen the hands of families with distressed mortgages in dealing with the banks. Minister, there are solutions. There's countless of them. We've debated this issue in this term on numerous occasions in this House. Start listening to the solutions and start implementing them for the benefit of the 142,000 families that currently are in mortgage arrears. But what you've done instead Instead of listening, instead of looking at real solutions for those families, instead of trying to tip the balance away from the banks and in the favour of Irish citizens, what you've done is you've cut mortgage interest supplements, a payment made to people with mortgages who've lost their jobs. It's simply unbelievable. It's not our fault, Minister, that we're here grappling, looking for logic where there is none in your policies. It just doesn't make sense. Agus ní doubt be go galahai shibshil go sa nort fadas na hera agus na moira na bheith callú biharu mar go méisi den Luis Iljalpa agus yet emniha for that Jane Major Tarofa margin moira. But where you've been consistent, and we have to take our hats off to you in this one, is with the banks, because you're clearly on their side. You said you would implement the Mercer report to cut bankers' pay, yet you allowed the top bankers to make savings by firing low-paid staff, closing down branches and cutting customer care. While at the same time, you allowed the likes of Richie Boucher, the head of Bank of Ireland, to continue to pay himself in excess of €800,000. So let's give you a fact, Minister, and get rid of all the bull that we've heard from you in this chamber over the last number of months. Not one of the 2,500 bankers that earn above €100,000 in the banks that are bailed out by the state have taken a penny pay cut this year on their base salary. Not one of them. Not one of them. And earlier this year, your government refused to use the state shareholding in Bank of Ireland to force Richie Boucher to take a pay cut. So riddle me this, Taoiseach. You have no problem standing up here. You have no problem in telling the citizens that put you in office that the young unemployed need to take a cut. They need to tighten their belt. You have no problem telling the elderly people that they need to go with less. You have no problem telling those on disability pensions that they need to go with less. You have no problem telling children that they need to soak up the cuts that you're dishing out. But you have a problem turning up to the AGM of Bank of Ireland and using the power that was invested in you as a shareholder to say to Richie Boucher, your €800,000 plus of remuneration is not on, because this country is broke and we're making difficult choices. Minister, your priorities have been exposed. How do you justify it, Minister? How do you justify it, Taoiseach? How do you justify it to yourself, to the Irish people, that a 24-year-old under your policies can live on €100 a week after today, but Richie Boucher can pay himself over €800,000? Are you going to? I will give way to the Taoiseach if he's willing to justify that.
No, sorry.
Sorry?
Deputy, no, please.
You're allowed under the rules of the House way if a deputy wants to interrupt.
I know, sorry. Order, please.
If the Taoiseach is willing to justify...
No, sorry.
If the Taoiseach is willing to justify...
Please.
If the Taoiseach is willing to justify the policies that this Fine Gael and Labour government have announced today, that a 24-year-old, a 23-year-old unemployed person can live on €100,000, yet they will sit €100, yet they will sit idly by and not peep at the AGM. In relation to Richie Boucher earning €800,000, I will give you the space.
Sorry, Deputy, please. There will be opportunity for people to contribute later on.
Taoiseach, the Irish people and the Irish economy are feeling the effects of your ambitionless policies. We've faced the reality this year, despite the predictions that were there a couple of years ago, of 0% growth in the economy. Yet you introduce a budget that goes beyond the necessary targets that have been set by the Troika. The Troika said that the target for this year was 5.1% deficit to GDP. But what the Labour Party have signed up to, what Fine Gael have signed up to, is 4.8%. Do you know what that means? As the Minister of Finance told us, it means €480 million of austerity measures that are not required to meet the Troika deficit. So why do you believe that putting the foot on the accelerator of austerity will do anything for growth? This from a Minister who stated so vehemently that you can't cut your way out of recession. What we have shown in our proposals is that how a multi-billion euro stimulus package can create jobs in the region of 100,000 jobs. That is how you drive economic activity. But yet again, what we have is your third budget, and you tell us again that you are going to use the National Pension Reserve Fund, that there's €6.4 billion in the National Pension Reserve Fund. Send the postcards to Australia, send them to Perth, send them to Canberra, send them to New York and to London, because the young people of this state couldn't wait for you to get your act together. They have left and they have given up. It is time that you've got your act together. You have announced that policy 3 years ago. This is the 3rd year now. It's over 2 years ago since you announced that policy. When this government came to power, the unemployment rate, as per the Live Register, was 13.5%. Now it is 13.3%. That is in addition to 176,000 people who have emigrated on your government's watch. 176.
Deputy Doherty has the floor. Now, please, on both sides. Deputy Doherty has the floor, please.
176,000 people, Taoiseach, have emigrated on your watch. 60% of those unemployed are now categorised as long-term unemployed. And the Jobs Minister is fond of saying that this government doesn't create jobs. Well, there's one thing we know for sure, they definitely don't. We are in a jobs crisis, and this government's official response has been to hold press conferences and to issue glossy reports. You have announced today what you call a €500 million stimulus. I welcome the extension of the 9% VAT rate. We called for it. But I don't think there's any sense of actually increasing the pension levy to 7.75%, which you're doing from 2014. I'm also pleased to hear announcement of several other measures, including raising the VAT accounting threshold, which we also called for. But, Minister, 500 million of investment is a drop in the ocean when we face a crisis of the magnitude we do in relation to jobs. So let's be honest, it comes on top of a lot of undelivered commitments from you and your colleagues, because you're a serial announcers but always choke on delivery. Minister Taoiseach, there's many other issues that we can deal with at a later stage when the finance bill comes forward, and Deputy Mary Lou McDonald will deal with some of these issues also. The reality is, Minister,
Deputy Doherty has the floor.
Taoiseach, how you treat the deficit can add or fix the problem. There is a scope for deficit reduction next year from fair measures, and Sinn Féin has shown you how to do that. But you don't do fair. You don't do fair. It's not in your dictionary. It's not in your vocabulary. Eamon Gilmore left the wee 4-letter word outside the door when he entered government buildings. Taoiseach, in your speech, Taoiseach, on your first day when you were elected, Taoiseach, you delivered a powerful observation of where the state was at. You said, our republic is betrayed. People are frightened of losing their homes. Parents are rendered speechless at the sight of their children boarding planes to countries where spring is autumn, and our today is their tomorrow. Employers are traumatised at laying off staff and shutting down businesses. Workers pray for invisibility as they queue for the dole. Families worry that their neighbours might see the Vincent de Paul calling to their door, dreading the postman dropping bills like stealth bombs into the hall. Well, Taoiseach, what has this government done to make the situation better? What has the government done to make the situation better for these people that you described? The answer is nothing, because you've intensified their pain, their worry and their anguish. Our republic was betrayed, Taoiseach, and you've had 3 opportunities to fix it. You've had 3 budgets, but there is nothing in what you offer today to put the economy on the right track or to offer people solace that they need. The bills will still fall from the letterboxes. The planes will still be full of our young people leaving. The dole queues still snake around the corner of the block. And people are still losing their homes, and the St Vincent de Paul have never been busier. Minister Taoiseach, Taoiseach, your government's budget is as empty as the words of An Taoiseach on the election of him to that office on his first day.
I now call on Deputy Mayor.